Welcome to Master Your Marriage, where we dive into the messy but beautiful heart of relationships, because that's what we're built for. We're wired to connect, and when we don't, it's brutal. The research even shows that this disconnection hits your body like smoking a pack and a half of cigarettes each day. This is how much intimacy matters in your relationship.
And that's why today's topic may be one of our most important yet. We are tackling what we call the serial killer of marriages.
Ooh.
And that's contempt.
Yep.
And how contempt and how it rips us from the connection that we are designed to have. And contempt is not just some snarky little comment. It's a poison, and it could be killing your relationship right now. So stick with us, because this episode is going to be a game changer. All right. So let me take you back for just a second.
Ooh, story time?
Story time.
Story time.
So,
okay.
You know, when couples when we all get into relationships, when we first start out in our relationships, we go through that honeymoon period. We call it phase one, right?
Yep.
Where we show each other this perfectly curated version, this beautiful side of us.
Do my dishes.
Not the truth, right?
Pick up my clothes.
And then when we start to see each other more truthfully,
in
more
our natural
honestly,
state.
in our natural state.
In our natural state. Yeah.
There's things we don't like about each other and about ourselves.
Without a doubt.
And so most couples go into this period of time called the crunch.
Yeah.
And the crunch is when we are trying to either yield to our partner, or we're trying to get our partner to yield to us, because there's this huge power struggle. And as we're trying to get usually our partner to yield to our perspectives, our ideas, and have our perspective win, we use a lot of very unhealthy, toxic strategies, losing strategies, we refer to them as. And when Robert and I first got married, the losing strategies that I fell back on were the ones that I learned growing up.
Learned at the feet of the master.
And I had some really, really good weapons.
I mean, in all fairness, I didn't have a very good example either. And so your skills, we're going to talk about the sort of the skill set, relationship skill set you learned, but I had a different skill set. And, you know, when we brought those two together, boy, they did clash. But enough about me. Let's talk about you.
So, you know, I think watching my mom and the way that she treated my dad growing up, it was my mom's way or the highway. Like, she was right, and it was going to be her way no matter what.
This sounds familiar.
And so one of those losing strategies is control, but how do we control? And the way that I would try to get my way to prevail, to get my way, would be through contempt.
Mm-hmm.
And contempt is making the other person feel small. It's making them feel worthless. It's making them feel so stupid or unworthy that they will side with you, that they will take your position, that they will yield to you. And it's done in many different ways we're going to talk about today. Coming out of this is what really started this fire in me, because I've lived it. I've watched it. I've seen it devastate my parents' relationship, and I saw it starting to devastate our relationship.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we're going to tell you the turning point part of that story later on. But, you know, now as a relationship coach, Robert and I both have spent years studying with giants like John Gottman, who calls contempt the top predictor for divorce. And also with Terry Real, whose relational life therapy digs into how grandiosity, which we're going to talk more about today, which is this belief that we're better than others, how that grandiosity is what lights the match for contempt and for the destruction that comes in its wake. And, you know, I've watched this break hearts up close with family and with the clients that I work with. And even still to this day, it guts me every time.
Yeah. Yeah.
How did it feel being on the other side of the receiving side of contempt?
Wow. I mean, I have to go back, but I think we've all had some experience with somebody who's contemptuous for us, right? And that comes from the person who's exhibiting that, either trying to make you feel worthless or making you feel less than. Sometimes they're angry. Sometimes they're just ignoring you because they're not worth your time. But it does. I mean, it hurts. It really just tears at your soul. And when you live in that, if you live in that long enough, you'll start to maybe even just doubt yourself. You're like, oh, well, maybe I'm really not worthy, or maybe I'm not really any good at anything. And, and you can see how that would spiral in a relationship. So it's super damaging. And, I think my solution, even though we were just 2-3 years in, I think maybe at the point where we maybe made a change, I already had started to distance myself from you and from the relationship because I didn't want to be around someone who thought I was worthless.
Right.
I mean, I didn't really have a plan to do anything else, but
I remember later, much later when we were able to process what in the world had happened to us early on in our marriage. And I remember you saying to me that, there was just nothing quite as ugly as kind of witnessing this person that you love be this way.
Yeah. Yeah, I do remember that.
That was hard to hear, but it was also important for me to hear.
Yeah.
So what if we start getting into the science?
Should we dig into the science?
Let's talk about contempt and what the science tells us about it.
All right. So as you know, there's a lot of science behind this. This isn't just us like venting and sharing stories from when we were first married, right? There's really good data that's sort of difficult if we don't pay attention to it. It's really just screaming there, right? Screaming out like you got to pay attention to this data because it's super important.
Yeah.
And if you're thinking to yourself like, oh, well, my sarcasm and my contempt really isn't that big of a deal. Actually, it is. Actually, it's very detrimental, right? And the stakes really much higher than you think that they are. So first up, let's talk about Dr. John Gottman. And if you're new here, he's the researcher who spent decades watching couples in his love lab. And based on that data that he gained over years and years of studying the same couples, he was able to develop a scary predictive accuracy of over 90% for those couples that would actually stay married or get divorced and or live completely unhappily, right? And the number one red flag that he found in the research, right, wasn't really about that they argued, right? It wasn't really anything. It wasn't that. It wasn't that they argued. It wasn't that they had disagreements. It was contempt. It wasn't the silent treatment, right? It wasn't even infidelity,
right? But
contempt. And he calls contempt the sulfuric acid of love and the fast track to divorce court.
Wow. So kind of imagine this with me, right? A wife asks her husband to take out the trash, and maybe he smirks, rolls his eyes a little bit, and says, "Oh, sure, Your Highness, fine. Anything else you want?" Right? That's contempt. It's kind of this mix of superiority and maybe even disdain that says, you are beneath me. And, it might even just be that little eye roll that's you make or that your partner makes when you share your dreams with them. Or it could be that whatever comment that just shuts them right down. So Gottman's research shows that this isn't just these annoying little things that we do. It's really the death knell. In his studies, couples with high contempt were the ones that were divorcing, no question. But why? Why is that? Because contempt it's not just a fight, right? It's a signal that you've stopped seeing your partner as an equal. In fact, it's probably even worse than that. It's signaling to them, you disgust me.
Yeah. And that was the hard part. Like I felt sometimes in that phase that I was just a really lowly, disgusting human being. Yeah. So you had mentioned, where in your last example, yes, Your Highness, is this more a women's problem than a men's problem? My only experience has been women's problem.
So no,
not that I don't
it's
have
not.
any,
There's
but
probably actually, if you look at the data, I think years past, it might have been a little bit more male thing to do, but I think it's actually, there's a lot of women who are grandiose. We're going to talk about grandiosity today a little bit more because that's what this stems from.
Okay.
But men and women can both be grandiose, and actually, just as an interesting aside from the topic for the moment, it's a lot harder in our culture today for women to recognize their grandiosity. Much harder than when with men. I think people will say to your face, "You know what, dude, you're being a real jerk,
being a bit of a dick."
Yeah. And to women, on the other hand, if a woman is grandiose, she often gets a lot of support culturally from society. Like, "Oh, you go, girl. Like,
you're
stepping into your power. This is women's empowerment. Your friends are going to back you and say, you go get him. You're setting your boundaries." Right. But with men, I think people are a little bit more honest with them and say, "You know what? You're being an a-hole. This is not a cool way for you to be."
Yeah. Well, so if you thought that maybe this message wasn't for you, than it probably is, because it crosses both genders.
It does.
Yeah.
It does.
So whether direct or indirect, when we're talking about criticism and contempt, the message is you're stupid, you're defective, you're nothing. And that's not just fighting words. Those are emotional wounds that take a long time to process. Those wounds go deep.
They do.
Yeah, and they did for a long time for me.
Yeah.
And here's where it gets even wilder. Contempt doesn't just wreck your marriage. Like, it doesn't just pour acid on your relationship, to use Dr. John Gottman's example.
Mm-hmm.
Research shows that actually, if you're on the receiving end of enough contempt, right, it actually weakens your immune system, makes you more prone to infectious diseases. I want you to think about that. So every sneer, every eye roll, every "you're worthless" isn't just pushing your partner away, but it's chipping down your own body and your partner's body, making them less able to handle just about everything.
I think that is so fascinating. And if you've, maybe looked into this research before, you might already know this. But to me, when I learned that, I thought, whoa, I mean, it makes sense, but that is just such evidence right there that this is so harmful to us psychologically, mentally, emotionally, and physically. So
Absolutely.
So if you're not sure yet if you do contempt, let's go through a list of signs. And this would be signs of grandiosity and contempt, right? So give us the first one.
Well, so the first sign of grandiosity, right?
And contempt,
which is I'm better than you, which is where contempt stemmed from. Maybe sarcasm. Like, oh, that's so cute.
Right. I mean, sarcasm can be funny, but most of the time it's usually got this edge to it. It's got this cut that is like, it gives you this denial. Like, I wasn't saying anything mean. I was just being funny.
Yeah.
But
it was cute that you chose to wear those shoes today.
Right. But there's that undertone that is so piercing and so hurtful to it. Yeah.
Death by 1,000 cuts.
The next one would be mocking. Anytime you're mocking, making fun of your partners, anything, it could be the way they talk. You might just mimic them in the way that they say something, and then you kind of repeat it back in their tone or their voice, and you're kind of like making fun.
Oh, it's one of the things when we're, just doesn't matter where we are. We hear somebody say like, oh, he's just dumb when it comes to that. We just look at each other and just go, ooh, that one's challenging, right? Because we recognize it for what it is.
So that goes along with kind of criticism. So criticisms can be that are really demeaning or attacking, or you're putting down or you're belittling.
Yeah. How about name calling?
Oh yeah. Any type of name calling would be contempt.
Yeah.
What about eye rolling?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it is. If you've seen a teenager do it, you know that they're not being kind.
Well, I mean, when you think about when you eye roll something, it's usually what you're disgusted with, right? And again, going back to that disgust word, what do you do with the things that disgust you? You throw them in the garbage.
Yeah.
Ew, I won't roll my eyes at this like leftover Thanksgiving food that's been in here for a month. Ew, throw it away.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
How about condescending conversations?
Putting you down.
I really dislike that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Entitlement. So when we're being grandiose and we're looking at ourselves as better than, right, and we're looking down at other people, we often act entitled in one way or the other.
Yeah.
And
it's okay for me to hurt your feelings because
it's okay because you did it. You made me do it.
Yeah.
Right. If you weren't doing the things that you do, then obviously I wouldn't have to act this way. So it's your fault. I'm entitled to act in this way and be contemptuous because I deserve to. You made me do it.
Yeah. Something like that.
Yeah.
Without a doubt.
So if you've listened to these, they sound really harsh, don't they? They sound even maybe a little abusive. And I used to tiptoe around that word, but I don't anymore because contempt is abusive. Contempt is emotional violence because it does cut deep. It does cause physical injury. It does make the other person ill, and it cuts deep, right? It creates a massive wound and it erodes trust, honestly, faster than anything else.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So we've talked about the science, and we realize that contempt really is the serial killer of marriages. This is backed by Gottman's research and the health studies showing that not only is it breaking our hearts, but it's breaking our health, right? But where does this poison come from? And as Charlotte mentioned, it comes from grandiosity. And if you're thinking, okay, well, I get it. So contempt is bad, but what's this grandiosity thing? This is where it clicks. Let's define it. Dr. Terry Real, in his relational life therapy, calls grandiosity the one-up position. And you've likely heard us teach about this one-up position here before. If not, go back the past couple episodes. We spent a lot of time on it, right? Yeah. So we're going to be able to connect some of the dots between grandiosity, based on Dr. Terry Real's research, and contempt.
Okay. So there's healthy way to value ourselves,
Yeah.
right? Our self-esteem. There's a healthy way to do it. And there's also some very dysfunctional ways to value ourselves. So grandiosity is actually a self-esteem disorder. It's one of two, right? One is the one up position. The other is the one down position. So one up is grandiosity, and it is a self-esteem disorder that causes us to have an inflated sense of superiority. It's where you feel better than, maybe smarter than, bigger than, more valuable than someone else. It's looking down your nose at your partner thinking, what's wrong with you? Obviously there's something wrong with you.
Why did I marry you?
Like, I've got this figured out. Why are you so clueless?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sound familiar at all? So I think we've all touched into this space of grandiosity. I don't think this is unfamiliar territory for anyone. I think we've all been there a little bit in some way.
I slide up into that.
Right. Well,
Yeah.
we know I do.
Yeah.
So, some of us do it where we might stay there a lot, though. Some of us spend a lot of time in grandiosity, and some of us might go there when we get triggered. But I think we're all at least familiar with what it's like.
And we're all guilty of it to some point. I think it's
Mm-hmm.
how fast you can recognize that you've slid to the outside edges of the boundaries of that.
Mm-hmm. And bring yourself
and then
back down.
And how soon can you bring yourself back down to
Yeah.
that, right? So if we understand that this erodes our relationship, then we realize that we cannot be connected or even intimate if we're one up. If I'm so much better than you, then I'm also not doing that. But I need to have this healthy self-esteem, and having a healthy self-esteem is realizing that I'm the same as
We're the same.
anyone else.
Yes.
And we're talking about our partner here, right? So I'm not better. I'm not any worse. I'm not more than. I'm not less than. We are just the same. We're flawed. We're imperfect. We make the same mistakes,
Mm-hmm.
right? And we're all just doing our best, just like you. You're trying to do your best. I'm trying to do my best, right? And we can't have healthy intimacy and connection without this part, without understanding that we're the same as. You can't love from the one up position because they disgust you. You can't love from the one down position because
you feel so much shame.
Then you feel shame and you feel worthless,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so it just, love demands that we see each other as equals, that we come together and we both understand our weaknesses and our strengths. And anything other than that really is just a distortion of the truth.
It is. That's how we're meant to be, because we are supposed to be all created equal. So anything else that comes into the relationship is just a distortion of the truth.
Yeah.
And I'm going to let you in on a really dirty little secret. So the unspoken secret that nobody wants to ever admit is that it's really hard to change grandiosity because, not impossible, right? But it's very hard because it's hard to come down from superiority.
It's like a drug.
It is. And the reason, as Robert said, the reason why it's a drug is because it feels good.
Yeah.
It feels like a rush of power. It feels good to lose constraint and scream at your partner or scream at your kids in the moment. You might feel like garbage a couple hours later, but in the moment.
And because you're grandiose, you realize the rules don't apply to you.
Right.
Or you think so.
And it can feel good to be righteous, self-righteous, and tell another person to, suck it. That self-righteous indignation actually can be quite intoxicating, like a drug.
Yeah.
And because it feels good, it is the fatal flaw of marriages and relationships.
Yeah, that chink right there. And so you can see we're sort of carrying that theme through, like, and explaining how they really do that, right?
Mm-hmm.
How this contempt and grandiosity, if you allow it into your relationship, will just widen that divide. And then eventually that whole thing's going to fall apart.
Kill trust.
Right?
Yeah.
So grandiosity exists on a spectrum, right? And as I talked about earlier, right, on the spectrum, there are many characteristics that overlap with maybe even narcissism. We've heard about that. That's super popular these days, right?
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't mean somebody who's being grandiose would necessarily be a narcissist, right? Or the diagnosis would be narcissistic personality disorder.
Right.
But maybe on the full-blown end of this grandiosity, right, with lots of contempt, maybe they could be narcissistic personality disorder, right?
For sure.
But there's a lot of gray area and space in between those two. Yeah. So let's talk about why grandiosity is such a trap. It's like a drug, right? So first, it impairs your judgment.
Okay,
right?
Whoa, that's a big thing. It impairs your judgment.
Yeah.
Think about that.
Well, because
does a drug.
Yeah, so do drugs, right?
So does, any sort of addiction to a drug. It
Yeah.
impairs your judgment.
Yeah. How do you like that? So when our judgment is impaired, it blinds you to the hurt that you're causing and sort of tricks you into thinking that you can get away with it and that it doesn't matter.
Right.
It's easy to treat your partner like they're one down, less than human, less worthy, and not even think twice about it because, well, your judgment is impaired. So you don't really have that internal alarm that's going off. You've sort of muted that, right? And it stops alerting you that maybe you're crossing the line.
Yeah, this is huge to think of it as if you're the partner that's in grandiosity. I remember this time when I told Robert, he said to me, you really hurt my feelings.
Oh yeah.
And this
Which
was
time was this?
another one of those pivotal moments in our relationship early on. And he said, that really hurt. That really hurt my feelings, something to that effect. And of course, I was really grandiose at the moment. In that moment, I was one up because we were in the middle of a fight. And so when I was triggered, that's where I would go. And I remember turning to Robert and saying, I don't give a beep, 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 beep about your feelings. Because in that moment, of course, your judgment is impaired and you don't see the consequences of how you're acting. You just don't see it if you let yourself go all the way there.
Yeah. And so, I mean, we've talked about this on the podcast before that led into probably about 5 years where I never mentioned my feelings to you.
I know.
Right.
That was a big trust breaker there.
How wonderful was our relationship for 5 years?
It was very distant. Yeah. It was kind of parallel tracks for a while.
Very superficial.
And of course, why would he trust me?
Yeah.
Why would he? So you can see how this is just such so destructive to trust. And I see it a lot in our practice, in our coaching practice, where one partner will move into grandiosity and then suddenly they're mocking the other person or belittling or making fun of them and doing voices. And they don't care that I even am witnessing it because they feel totally justified in their actions. They feel like they're completely right. I'm wrong. Their partner's wrong. And the contempt is just pouring out, right? With the sarcasm, the eye rolls, the body language that just is like, you just don't even deserve me.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh my gosh. Well, so this leads into the second thing that grandiosity does, right? And it shuts down empathy. I love to say that criticism is a lack of empathy because you don't care how the other person feels.
You shut down your ability to have empathy.
Yeah.
That is such an important component to grandiosity and what contempt is all about.
Yeah. You can't even bring empathy to the table. You can't understand how it makes you feel. Right. So the more grandiose you are, the less you feel for others, right? You stop caring how your little snide remark lands or how your cutting remarks will get to your partner. And then again, it's your relationship is starting to die by 1,000 cuts. Just one at a time.
And it's almost like contempt is more than one cut.
Yeah.
It's like it counts for 100 or 1,000 cuts at once because it runs so deep. And all of this happens again because we stop seeing our partner as an equal. We see ourselves as better than, we see them as less than. And even if we're not consciously aware of that, just think about that. Like think about when it is that you've thought that they just weren't as good at you as you in something. You could never really take care of the finances because you're not too smart.
I sort of love what you just said there. And I think I missed it, or maybe, and I want everybody to just kind of get it. We stopped seeing our what?
As our partner as an equal.
Our partner.
The word partner.
The word partner.
I think we forget that they're our partner.
Yeah.
We don't treat them like a partner.
Yeah. They're not your servant. They're not your underling.
So grandiosity is this little voice that might whisper into our ear that says, I'm superior. And you know what? I deserve to act this way. So let's peel back what is really going on here at the core, because at the core, as we said earlier, it's a distortion and it is a lie. Grandiosity is not truth. It is a delusion. It is a lie. We as humans love to believe that one person could be more valuable than another person, and it's just not true. All humans are inherently of value. No one is greater than or less than another. That is what democracy is, right? So we are all worthy equally simply because we exist, not because of some great achievement that we've done, not because we've made $1 million. It's not because we've done something great. And we can't take away someone's value because they've done something wrong or they've sinned or they've made mistakes, right?
Right.
Worth is inherent, but grandiosity sells you this fantasy that you're above that, but it's a con. It's not, you're not above your partner, right? You're just probably honestly feeling frustrated in your relationship, or you're feeling disconnected, but you're not above them.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're asking yourself, why does this matter to you? Like, especially if you're the grandiose one, right?
Well, a grandiose person might not want to
Yeah.
look at that, right?
And let's be honest, we've all got a little bit of the streak of this grandiosity, right? But if you keep clutching on to your superiority, you're probably going to lose everything.
Mm-hmm.
People don't want to be around you. Relationships will suffer. You can't do this and keep your family. Your partner's going to start drifting away. Your kids are starting to watch how you demonstrate this contempt and how you're dishing it out, even to them. And this is going to come back and hit you. It's going to come back and bite you with loneliness, regret, because people just don't want to hang around somebody who treats them like nothing. That's where we were, right? I didn't want to be there.
And the impact to the kids is massive.
Yeah. I mean,
like, not only are you going to destroy your health and destroy your relationship, but your kids, if you have kids, they're going to carry this on and deal with this in some fashion the rest of their life as well, because it's going to come up in some way in their partnerships. I think the kids of grandiose parents are suffering with attachment disorders.
But it doesn't mean that you can't get past it.
Of course.
Right? I mean, the skills that we talk about really are, how can we identify that? Right? And then how can you begin to make the changes? And you can change.
And make that choice. You absolutely can. It's just hard because it feels good to be there. So you have to wake up to the damage that you're doing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you're the one down partner to a grandiose spouse, I have some good news for you. I have some bad news for you. The good news is that
good news first.
It can be healed.
Yeah.
Like you just said, this isn't something that isn't insurmountable. Your spouse absolutely can change. I know that this is true because I know that I did. And I know other people who have. But I'm sorry to say, and this is the bad news, that you aren't going to be able to love them into changing. You're not going to placate your way into an equal marriage. You're not going to just say, yes, yes, honey, yes, honey, yes, honey, yes, honey, I'll change. I'll do all these things for you. And they're going to come down from their one-up position.
You're never going to be able to prove your worthiness.
You have to be clear, and you have to be explicit, and you have to stand up for yourself.
Yeah.
Not in a passive aggressive way, not in a manipulative way, but clearly, explicitly, and truthfully. So there was this period of time. So this was, again, back in the early days of our marriage, when I think Robert was fed up. He was over it. He was done with this. And he looks at me one day in the most calm tone, not at all triggered, not at all angered, not at all flooded. And he just looks at me, and I could feel he was done. And he just said, Charlie, you can't treat me like this anymore. You can't.
Yeah.
And something in me snapped at that moment. And I understand the neuroscience of it a little bit better. There's two things that will help someone to lay down new neural pathways and create change. And when these two things happen together simultaneously, we open ourselves up to create these new pathways and to create that change. The first one is something explicit. So something that was implicit before, like I probably knew that I was doing these things, but it was unspoken.
Right.
But the moment it became explicit and we changed it from implicit to explicit, it was a shock. And then when we have this recoil or this jolt that happens, that's the second part of it. So that recoil combined with the explicitness of it, it opened up something in my brain to lay down a new track for learning a new way of being. And I didn't still have the tools yet, but that's what created the change. So you have to, as the partner, like Robert did, I don't know if you want to add to that, but
no, I was going to say, I mean, I think that if we're talking about a tool, what do you think it would be that would maybe have, other than what you explained, what would help a grandiose partner maybe just listen for a second? Like what could be said? Because I'm sure there's people that are thinking, man, I have this in my life. I didn't know that's what I had. I just knew that I just didn't want to be treated like dirt anymore. And I think it really just came from that place for me. It was just I don't know if I felt like I was done. I just wasn't even mad about it anymore.
Yeah.
I think I was just matter of fact. I'm just like, look,
Mhm.
you can't treat me this way anymore.
I mean, I think the first thing is just, it has to become clear. You can't just turn your back on the person, give them the silent treatment and think that they're going to understand. You
Yeah.
can't just give a grandiose person the silent treatment and go in your room or go for a drive or leave the house. You have to be clear and you have to say it in the way that you said it. So that could just be, you know what? This isn't okay. And baby, I love you and I want this marriage to work. But if we don't get some help, if we don't change this, then something's going to have to change.
Yeah.
And be clear about what that change is going to be, whether that's going to be the end of the relationship or whatever. There's a lot of things between 0 and 100 there that we can say are going to be the consequences, but it has to be explicit.
Must have been the one Zen thing that I said early on.
It was pretty good. Thank goodness you said it, right?
Yeah. Not known for being Zen all the time, but especially back then.
Yeah.
Well, so I really want you to hear us. And that's why we're just trying to share these examples, right? Repair is possible. We've seen it happen. We've seen it happen in our own marriage. We've seen it happen in the couples we work with. When the one up decides to just take a step down, right? And crumbles, the contempt then fades and suddenly there's space in their heart for love and
empathy
and empathy and repair.
Yeah.
So for you, if you're feeling like you're the better person in your relationship in just about everything, there's a choice, right?
Mm-hmm.
Stay along that path and you're probably going to start to lose your relationship one bit at a time.
Right.
Until maybe it just withers away, or drop it, right? Or just see if you can come down off that and win something amazing and real and get your relation back. It's amazing. It can happen, but it's a choice.
It is a choice.
It is a choice. So this is a topic that we spent years studying because we've both seen just the absolute destruction that contempt and grandiosity can take on a relationship. And we've seen their redemption firsthand, right? Yeah. And the relationship you'll have because you've broke free from that will be tremendous. And that's what we want for you.
So I don't think I completely came back and answered your question. I said it has to start by becoming explicit, but what are some other ways for someone who is the grandiose partner for them to, if they're waking up right now and they're listening to this episode and maybe they got that same sort of recoil and shock and they're hearing this explicitly, maybe they've opened up a new track.
Right.
What can they do right now? Well, I think start with very basic empathy. And maybe we'll do an episode on empathy next week.
Yeah.
But start with basic remedial, because again, empathy has been a challenge for you, but start with basic empathy before you even open your mouth. From now on, for take 1 week, right? And just go, okay, for 1 week, every time I open my mouth, I'm going to pause and I'm going to ask myself, how is this going to feel for the other person who's receiving this? How is it going to feel? And start to track. Oh, might that hurt? I'm not even sure if I've been able to perceive that before, but maybe now I can perceive that what I'm going to say is probably going to hurt. And start tracking. Start tracking how your words are hitting other people. See if you can try to connect with what they're feeling. I mean, this seems really simple, but you have to be able to see past your own nose, and we have to become open and awake to the consequences of our actions.
Yeah. I mean, I think the point is, and we've talked about this in the past, I think people that are grandiose, like all of the things that are there, sarcasm, contempt, all those things, belittling, mocking, when you're grandiose, you actually won't tolerate those things.
From someone else?
From someone else.
Oh, no.
No, absolutely. Those are like absolute no's. Don't talk down to me.
Right.
Right. And so I think maybe the goal, to go with what Charlotte just said, was just think about if somebody said the things that you're about to say to you, not just how it hits. Just turn around, and Charlotte mentioned that, right? Just spin that around and just say, if somebody said this to me, what would I feel like? Mm-hmm. And, and if you're on the inside, if you're saying no one would say that to me, that might be a clue that you shouldn't say that.
So what's one more thing? So besides empathy and tracking and maybe keeping a journal, what else can someone do?
Well, I think one of the other things you can do really, and this is from our coaching toolkit, is just really just breathe, right? If you feel like you're getting spun up, or maybe you just, you're stuck on that grandiose rush, right? Like you're about to, I'm going to take them down. This is the one I'm going to use this comment, right? Just stop, take a couple of deep breaths, right? Breathe. consider how that contempt might feel if
Yeah.
it was directed at you,
Yeah.
not just directed at someone else, right? But that can help stop contempt in its track. And third, I mean, I think you just have to own your crap,
Yeah.
right? If you catch yourself eye rolling or sneering or mocking or talking down to your partner, just stop. Stop. And you know what? And then you can own it and say, you know what? I was wrong. I shouldn't treat you like that. I wouldn't tolerate it. This is the thing about grandiosity. You wouldn't tolerate anyone treating you that way.
Mm-hmm.
So let's just think of, if there's something that you wouldn't tolerate, I think it's something you shouldn't do, right? Owning your mistakes, apologizing to your partner, saying, look, I should treat you better. That's a strength. That's not a weakness.
Yeah.
That's an absolute strength. And your partner will see it as such.
Oh, 100%. That's the best place to start, is to just apologize and admit it.
Yeah.
You know, one more thing I think before we conclude this episode is that there are some covert ways of doing contempt. And because I can kind of hear some of you thinking or saying out there like, well, I'm not overtly doing these things. I don't yell. I don't scream. But what are some covert ways that you might be doing it?
Ooh.
Sneaky, sly, the little eye rolls, right? As you walk out of the room, the body language that you're giving off. Because if you're making the other person feel less than, it is contempt, even if it's not yelling and screaming and overt.
Yeah. It's also the passive aggressive behavior.
It can be, for sure.
Yeah. I mean, you asked me to do something. I'm like, yep, sure. I'll get right on that, and then never do it because you're not worthy for me to do that task.
All right. Well, this was enlightening. I hope you guys found it helpful. It was a little bit brutal. Yeah. The things that we shared with you today, the breathing, taking responsibility, the working on remedial empathy, these are not going to be quick magic fixes. These are things that you're going to need to start now and work on for a lifetime. But they are the steps that will retrain your heart and retrain your nervous system and your reactivity. And honestly, they're the same steps I still use to this day if I catch myself going there.
Okay, so we want to challenge you to try one day without contempt. Notice when grandiosity creeps in, and use these tools and see what shifts, right? And then come over to social media and share it with us. We'd love to continue the conversation.
Yes.
Right?
Well, thanks so much for being here today. Yes. We're done for this episode, but actually the work is just beginning, okay? Be kind to each other this week. Take the challenge that we gave you guys today. Put your relationships first. Remember, it's the small things done often that make the greatest impact.
Until next time.